some wounds never heal, especially when they take your child from you. Weldon Parr lost his daughter 10 years ago, not to tragedy, but to a courtroom where his late wife's parents painted him as unfit. Now 52 and living quietly, he works odd jobs and avoids anything that reminds him of that pain. Then a lawyer's letter arrives. His father has died and left him an old ship, rusting and buried in a field far from the ocean. Inside that vessel lies something his father hid for years. Evidence that could prove Weldon's in-laws lied in court. As he starts restoring the boat, people in town begin watching him. Some remember things they shouldn't. Others want the past to stay buried. What really happened the day they took his daughter? Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The apartment smelled like coffee and sawdust. Weldon Parr stood at the kitchen counter, hands wrapped around a chipped mug, watching steam rise in the early morning light. Outside, the city was waking up. Delivery trucks rumbling past, a dog barking somewhere down the block, the distant hiss of a bus pulling away from the curb. He'd lived in this place for 8 years now. Small, furnished with mismatched furniture he'd picked up at thrift stores or found on curbs. Nothing fancy. Nothing that felt like home. He was a man built for physical work. At 52, his shoulders still carried the breadth of someone who'd spent decades lifting, carrying, and fixing things. His hands were calloused, scarred in places where tools had slipped or materials had bitten back. Gray touched his temples and threaded through the stubble on his jaw. His eyes, a faded blue, held the kind of quiet that comes from years of keeping thoughts to yourselves. The red toolbox sat on the table behind him. He'd pulled it out last night after the letter arrived. Just looking at it made something tighten in his chest. Weldon took another sip of coffee and turned to face the envelope. White, official-looking, with a return address from a law firm he'd never heard of. Morrison and Associates, out in some rural county 3 states away. He'd opened it last night, read it twice, then set it down and stared at the wall until midnight. His father was dead. The words sat heavy in his mind. Frank Parr, 78 years old, passed away in his sleep 2 weeks ago. Weldon hadn't known. They hadn't spoken in over a decade. Not since the custody hearing, not since the day Weldon's whole world collapsed and his father had stood in the back of the courtroom, silent as stone, and then walked out without a word. The letter said Frank had left him something. An inheritance. Not money. Weldon's father had never had much of that. But property. A piece of land and whatever was on it. The lawyer's letter was vague on details, just an address and a request that Weldon come in person to sign papers and take possession. Weldon set the mug down and picked up the letter again. The address meant nothing to him. Some town called Mercer Springs, population barely 2,000. Middle of nowhere. He'd never heard his father mention it. But then, his father had never been one for long conversations. Frank Parr had spent 40 years working merchant marine vessels, gone for months at a time, returning with sun-weathered skin and stories he never quite told. Weldon's mother had died when he was 12, and after that, it was just the two of them in a small house by the docks. Frank would leave for voyages, and Weldon would stay with neighbors, or later by himself. They existed in parallel lives that occasionally intersected for a week or two between ships. Weldon had loved his father in that distant, aching way. You love someone who's never quite there. He walked to the window, looked down at the street below. A woman was pushing a stroller. An old man sat on a bench with a newspaper. Normal people doing normal things. He used to be normal once. He used to have a family. The memories always started the same way. Sarah. Dark hair that caught the sunlight. A laugh that made him feel like everything might actually turn out okay. They'd met when he was 28, married a year later. She'd been the daughter of money. Something Weldon didn't fully understand until he met her parents, Margaret and Harold Finch. Old money, the kind that came with expectations and control. They hadn't approved of Weldon, a handyman, a blue-collar worker with no college degree and no prospects beyond fixing other people's problems. But Sarah had loved him, and that had been enough. For a while. Emma was born 2 years into their marriage. A tiny thing with Sarah's eyes and Weldon's stubborn chin. The best thing that ever happened to him. He'd held her in the hospital and felt something shift inside him, like the world had suddenly reorganized itself around this small, breathing person. They'd been happy. Not perfect, no one is, but happy. Weldon worked hard, came home tired, and Sarah managed their little house with Emma toddling behind her. They had routines, pancakes on Sundays, evening walks when the weather was nice. The kind of life that doesn't seem special until it's gone. Then Sarah got sick. It happened fast. She'd been tired, complained of headaches and nausea. Doctors ran tests but couldn't find anything definitive. She seemed to get better for a while, then worse again. Weldon remembered the morning he found her collapsed in the bathroom, the ambulance, the hospital, the way the doctors spoke in careful, measured tones that told him nothing and everything. She died 3 days later. Brain hemorrhage, they said. Rare, unpredictable, nothing anyone could have done. Emma was 6 years old. Weldon had barely processed it when Margaret and Harold appeared. Not to grieve with him, not to help with Emma, to take her. You can't care for her properly, Margaret had said, standing in his living room like she owned it. You work all day. You can barely support yourself. Emma needs stability. She needs family. I'm her family, Weldon had said. I'm her father. And we're her grandparents. We have the means to give her everything she needs. You have nothing. The custody battle had been swift and brutal. The Finches hired expensive lawyers who painted Weldon as negligent, unstable, potentially dangerous. They brought witnesses who testified he'd been absent, that Sarah had managed everything alone, that he'd failed as a husband and would fail as a father. Ruby Chen, a woman from their neighborhood, had testified that she'd seen Weldon yelling at Sarah. Weldon barely remembered the incident. A fight about money, probably. Stress making both of them sharp. But in court, it sounded like abuse. The judge, an older man with thin lips and cold eyes, had listened to it all. Then he'd ruled in favor of the Finches. Supervised visitation only, pending further review. Weldon had tried. He'd shown up for every scheduled visit, brought toys and books, tried to make Emma smile. But Margaret was always there, watching, making notes. After 3 months, she filed a motion claiming Weldon was disruptive and confusing the child. The visits stopped entirely. His lawyer said they could appeal, but it would take money Weldon didn't have. The Finches had bottomless resources. They could drag it out for years. So Weldon had stopped fighting, not because he didn't love Emma, but because he couldn't watch her cry every time he had to leave. Because every visit felt like tearing a wound open again. Because he was exhausted and broken and didn't know how to fight people with that much power. He moved to this city, took whatever work he could find, and tried to build something resembling a life. That was 10 years ago. Emma would be 16 now. He wondered if she remembered him. Probably not. Or if she did, it was the version Margaret had created. The father who abandoned her, who wasn't strong enough to stay. The thought made his chest ache in a way that never really went away. Weldon looked back at the toolbox. Red metal, dented and scratched, with his father's initials stamped on the side. FP in faded black letters. Frank had given it to him when Weldon was 15, handed it over without ceremony. You'll need this, he'd said. That was it. No explanation, no life lessons. Just the toolbox and the assumption that Weldon would figure out the rest. He'd carried it through every job, every apartment, every version of his life. Inside were the tools his father had used, and the ones Weldon had added over the years. Wrenches, screwdrivers, a hammer with a worn wooden handle. Everything he needed to fix things. Everything except what was broken in his life. Weldon picked up the letter again, read the address one more time. Mercer Springs. He pulled out his phone, looked it up. A tiny town in a rural county, surrounded by farmland and forests. The kind of place that probably had one diner and a gas station. The lawyer said the property included a structure. No details on what kind. His father had never mentioned owning land anywhere. Frank had rented the same small house by the docks for 30 years, lived simply, saved nothing. Where had this property come from, and why leave it to Weldon now after all this silence? Part of him wanted to ignore it. Sell the land site unseen, take whatever money it brought, and move on. Keep his head down. Keep surviving. But another part, a part he thought he'd buried 10 years ago, wanted to know, wanted to understand why his father had stood silent in that courtroom, why he'd walked away, what he'd been thinking all these years. Weldon went to the bedroom, pulled a duffel bag from the closet, and started packing. Not much. A few changes of clothes, toiletries, the letter. He hesitated, then grabbed the framed photo from his nightstand. Emma, at 4 years old, sitting on his shoulders, laughing at something off camera. Sarah had taken it at a park. One of the last good days. He wrapped the frame in a shirt and tucked it into the bag. Back in the kitchen, he picked up the red toolbox. Solid, heavy, familiar. If there was a structure on this property, it probably needed work. And if Weldon knew anything, it was how to work. He locked the apartment, walked down 3 flights of stairs, and stepped out into the morning. His truck was parked at the curb, an old Ford, more rust than paint, but it ran. He tossed the bag and toolbox in the back, climbed into the cab, and sat there for a moment. The city stretched out around him. People moving through their days, living their lives. He'd been one of them for a long time now, anonymous, safe, small. But something was pulling him away. Maybe it was the property. Maybe it was the need to see what his father had left behind. Maybe it was the faked, desperate hope that somewhere in all of this, there was an answer to the question that had haunted him for 10 years. What really happened? Weldon started the engine, pulled away from the curb, and headed for the highway. The city fell away behind him, replaced by stretches of road and open sky. He drove for hours, watching the landscape change from urban sprawl to suburbs to farmland. The radio played old country songs and static-filled news reports. He stopped once for gas and bad coffee, then kept going. By late afternoon, he saw the sign. Mercer Springs, population of 1847. Welcome. The town was exactly what he'd imagined. A main street with a handful of shops, a diner with a weathered sign, a post office, a bar. People move slowly here. An old man on a porch, a woman sweeping the sidewalk in front of a store. They watched his truck pass with the mild interest small towns reserve for strangers. Weldon followed the directions the lawyer had given him. Past the main street, down a 2-lane road that curved through farmland. Past a rusted mailbox, a stand of trees, a gate that hung half open. Then he saw it. The property was at the end of a long dirt driveway, surrounded by overgrown grass and tangled bushes, and in the center of it all, impossibly, was a ship. Not a small boat, a ship. Massive, rusting, tilted slightly to one side. The hull was covered in patches of brown and orange decay, and the vegetation had grown up around it like the earth was trying to reclaim it. The deck was littered with debris, and the cabin structure rose like a forgotten monument. Weldon stopped the truck, stared through the windshield, and felt something crack open inside him. His father's ship. He'd seen it once, as a kid. Frank had taken him aboard when it was docked, shown him the captain's quarters, let him spin the wheel. Weldon had been maybe 10 years old, awestruck by the size of it, the idea that his father commanded something so big. Now it sat here, miles from any ocean, half buried in a field. Weldon got out of the truck slowly, walked toward it. Up close, the ship was even more overwhelming. Rust streaked down from the railings. Windows were cracked or missing. A gangway had been rigged up, weathered wood planks leading to a gap in the hull. He climbed aboard. The deck creaked under his weight. Everything smelled like rust and rot and something faintly sweet, like old wood. He walked carefully, testing each step until he reached the door to the cabin. It was unlocked. Inside, the air was stale but dry. The captain's quarters were surprisingly intact. A desk, a chair, a narrow bed. Shelves lined with books and charts. And on the desk in the center was an envelope with his name on it. Weldon picked it up, his hands shaking slightly. The handwriting was his father's. Blocky, precise. He opened it. Inside was a single key and a note. Weldon, everything you need is here. I'm sorry I couldn't do more when it mattered, but I never stopped trying. The truth is in the ship. Find it. Use it. Make things right. Dad. Weldon stood there, holding the note, staring at his father's words. Everything you need is here. He looked around the cabin, at the shelves and the desk and the shadows in the corners. Somewhere in this ship, his father had hidden something. Evidence. Answers. The truth. Weldon folded the note carefully, put it in his pocket, and set the red toolbox on the desk. Then he got to work. Weldon spent the first hour just walking through the ship, taking inventory of what remained. The vessel was a working freighter, probably 60 years old, built for hauling cargo across rough seas. His father had commanded it for the last 15 years of his career, according to the faded certificate still hanging in the cabin. The ship had been decommissioned decades ago, but somehow Frank had acquired it and transported it here. God knows how or why. The hull was surprisingly sound, despite the rust. Below deck, the cargo holds were empty except for a few rotting pallets and scattered debris. The engine room was stripped, just hollow spaces where machinery had been. But the living quarters, the cabin, the galley, the small crew berthing, those remained mostly intact. Weldon found himself drawn back to the captain's quarters. It felt like stepping into his father's mind. Everything was organized with military precision. Charts were rolled and stored in tubes. Books lined the shelves in alphabetical order. The desk had drawers with label dividers. He started with the desk. The top drawer held pens, pencils, a ruler. The second had papers. Receipts, insurance documents, nothing significant. The third was locked. Weldon tried the key from the envelope. It didn't fit. He studied the lock, then went back to his truck for the toolbox. Inside, he found a small tension wrench and a pick. Skills from a misspent youth, back when he and his friends thought breaking into abandoned buildings was adventure rather than trespassing. He worked the lock carefully, feeling for the pins, and after a few minutes, heard the click. The drawer slid open. Inside was a leather-bound book, a ship's logbook, the kind captains were required to keep. Weldon lifted it out carefully. The cover was worn smooth, the pages yellowed and stiff. He opened it to the first entry. The date made him pause. It was from 12 years ago, right around the time Sarah had gotten sick. He flipped through slowly. His father's handwriting filled every page. Dates, times, weather conditions, course headings. Standard maritime documentation. But then, about halfway through, the entries changed. They became longer, more detailed, and they weren't about the ship anymore. They were about Margaret and Harold Finch. Weldon's hands tightened on the book. He read slowly. September 12th. Received another call from Margaret Finch today. She asked about Weldon's work schedule, whether he's home with Emma regularly. I told her it's none of her business. She said it would become her business soon enough. Hung up on her. September 19th. Margaret called again. This time she was more direct. Said she's been watching Weldon and Sarah taking notes. Said Sarah is struggling and that Weldon isn't equipped to handle the situation. I asked what situation. She wouldn't say. Just kept talking about Emma's welfare. I told her to leave my son alone. October 3rd. Sarah called me. First time in months. She sounded scared. Said her mother has been showing up unannounced, bringing doctors, insisting Sarah needs help. Sarah says she feels fine most days, just tired. I asked if Weldon knows. She said she doesn't want to worry him. I told her to document everything, keep a record. Weldon's breath caught in his throat. Sarah had called his father. She'd been scared, and he'd never known. He kept reading. October 10th. Margaret Finch left a voicemail. Didn't call back. The message was clear. Enough. She's preparing something. I've started making my own documentation. Called a lawyer friend. Asked about grandparents' rights in custody cases. Didn't like what I heard. October 15th. Sarah's gone. Weldon called. Barely coherent. Brain hemorrhage. I'm heading back to port early. Should arrive in 3 days. God help us. October 18th. Made it to the hospital. Too late. Sarah's already been buried. The Finches arranged everything, didn't wait for Weldon to make decisions. Margaret looked at me during the service like she'd already won something. Harold just stood there, empty. November 2nd. The Finches filed for custody. I knew it was coming. Talked to Weldon, tried to convince him to fight harder, but he's destroyed. Can't blame him. I've hired a private investigator to look into Margaret's background. Something isn't right about Sarah's death. Weldon stopped reading. His vision blurred. He set the logbook down, pressed his palms against his eyes, and tried to breathe. His father had known. He'd seen it coming. He'd tried to help, and Weldon had spent 10 years thinking his father hadn't cared. After a moment, he picked up the logbook again. November 14th. PI found something. Margaret's first husband died 23 years ago. Fall down the stairs, ruled accidental. But there were inconsistencies in the police report. Witnesses who weren't interviewed. Margaret inherited everything. Nobody questioned it because she came from money anyway. November 20th. Attended the custody hearing. Sat in the back. Wanted to testify about Margaret's threats. But Weldon's lawyer said it would seem biased. Angry father defending his son. The Finch's lawyers were good. Professional. They made Weldon look like a failure. Ruby Chen testified against him. Said she saw him yelling at Sarah. Ruby looked terrified the whole time, like someone had a gun to her back. November 21st. They took Emma. Judge ruled for supervised visitation only. I watched Weldon fall apart. Wanted to say something, anything, but what good are words now? I failed him. Failed Sarah. Failed Emma. But I'm not done yet. December 1st. PI confirms suspicions about Ruby Chen. The Finches paid off her mortgage 2 weeks before the hearing. $30,000. Transferred directly from Harold Finch's account to her bank. Ruby testified because she had no choice. They bought her house to control her testimony. December 15th. Collected evidence, photos, financial records, recorded phone calls, everything I could find. Took it to a lawyer. He said it's compelling but would need to be presented carefully. Any misstep and the Finch's lawyers would bury us. He advised waiting, building a stronger case. January 8th. Weldon stopped returning my calls. Can't blame him. I stood silent in that courtroom. He thinks I didn't care. Maybe it's better that way for now. He needs to survive this, not carry my failures too. January 20th. Margaret called me directly. How? She got my number. I don't know. She said if I interfere, she'll make sure Weldon never sees Emma again. Not visits, not photos, nothing. She has judges, lawyers, people who owe her favors. I believe her. So I'm doing this differently now. I'm documenting everything, building a case that can't be buried or ignored. When the time is right, Weldon will have what he needs. The entries continued for months, then years. His father had spent a decade collecting evidence, phone records showing Margaret's calls before Sarah's death, financial documents proving the bribe to Ruby Chen, medical records Frank had somehow obtained showing Sarah had visited multiple doctors with symptoms no one could explain, witness statements from people who knew the Finches and had their own stories of intimidation and control. All of it carefully logged and cross-referenced. The final entry was dated 3 months ago. I'm dying. Doctor says 6 months, maybe less. Cancer. Spent my whole life on ships and it's my own body that sinks me. I've transferred the property to Weldon in my will. The ship is here, in Mercer Springs, on land I bought 15 years ago for this exact purpose. Everything is hidden in these walls. Evidence, documents, recordings. I've left him a map, a trail to follow. He'll understand when he's ready. I couldn't save Sarah. I couldn't stop the Finches then. But maybe, even now, I can give Weldon a chance to make things right. To get his daughter back. Tell him I'm sorry I wasn't stronger. Tell him I never stopped fighting, even when he couldn't see it. Tell him, hell, he'll read this himself. Weldon, if you're reading this, you deserved better from me. From all of us. But you still have time. Don't waste it. The truth is in this ship. Find it. Use it. Bring Emma home. Weldon closed the logbook slowly. His hands were shaking. His throat felt tight, like something was pressing against it from the inside. His father had known everything. Had been fighting the whole time, quietly, in the background, while Weldon fell apart. And now he was gone, leaving only this, a ship full of secrets and a decade's worth of evidence against the people who destroyed Weldon's life. He stood up, walked to the porthole, looked out at the overgrown field. The sun was setting, casting long shadows across the grass. Somewhere out there, 3 states away, Emma was living with people who'd lied and bribed and possibly killed to keep control of her. Weldon had spent 10 years in survival mode. Working, sleeping, avoiding anything that hurt too much to think about. He'd let the Finches win because fighting them felt impossible. But his father had built him a weapon. Now he just had to figure out how to use it. He turned back to the cabin, looked at the shelves, the drawers, the walls. His father said everything was hidden here. A map, a trail, evidence that could bring the truth to light. Weldon picked up the toolbox, set it on the desk, and opened it. Time to start searching. The next morning, Weldon woke on the narrow bed in the captain's quarters, stiff and disoriented. Gray light filtered through the portholes. He'd fallen asleep sometime after midnight, exhausted from searching. The ship creaked and settled around him, wood and metal adjusting to the temperature change. He stood, stretched, and looked at what he'd found so far. He'd started with the obvious places: drawers, cabinets, storage lockers. Most contained routine items, spare parts, old tools, maritime manuals. But tucked behind a false panel in the closet, he'd found a wooden box. Inside were more documents. Financial records showing payments from Harold Finch to various people. Not just Ruby Chen, but others. A court clerk, a social worker who'd evaluated Weldon's home. Small amounts, nothing that would raise immediate red flags, but a pattern nonetheless. The Finches had bought testimony piece by piece. Weldon had catalogued everything, taking photos with his phone, making notes. His father had organized this material carefully, but it was dense, overwhelming. There were years of documentation here, and Weldon needed to understand how it all fit together. He also needed food. He climbed down from the ship, walked to his truck, and drove back toward town. Mercer Springs looked different in morning light, worn but stable, the kind of place where everyone knew everyone and strangers stood out. He parked in front of the diner he'd seen yesterday. Ruby's place, according to the sign. The irony wasn't lost on him. Inside, the diner had a counter with red vinyl stools and booths along the windows. An older woman stood behind the counter, pouring coffee for a man in overalls. She looked up when Weldon entered, and her expression shifted. Recognition, then something more complicated. "Sit anywhere," she said. Weldon took a booth by the window. The woman brought him a menu and a cup of coffee without asking. Up close, she was probably in her 60s, with gray-streaked hair pulled back and tired eyes that had seen a lot of years. "You're Frank Parr's son," she said. Not a question. Weldon nodded. "I am." "Thought so. You look like him. I'm Ruby Chen. I own this place." The name hit him like cold water. Ruby Chen, the woman who testified against him in court, who'd said she'd seen him yelling at Sarah, made him sound dangerous. Ruby saw the recognition on his face and winced. "Yeah," she said quietly. "That Ruby Chen." Weldon didn't know what to say. Part of him wanted to leave, avoid this conversation entirely. But another part, the part that had spent the night reading his father's logbook, wanted to hear what she had to say. "I'll give you a minute with the menu," Ruby said, and walked away. Weldon stared at the menu without seeing it. Around him, the diner buzzed with quiet morning conversation. A couple of farmers discussing weather, a woman on her phone talking about picking kids up from school. Normal life, moving forward, while his stayed frozen. Ruby returned a few minutes later. "Know what you want?" "Eggs and toast," Weldon said. "Coffee's fine." She wrote it down, hesitated, then said, "Your father was a good man. He came in here a lot last few years. Always sat in that booth right there." She nodded toward the corner. "We talked sometimes. He told me about you." Weldon looked up at her. "What did he tell you?" "That you'd been dealt a bad hand. That he was trying to make it right." Ruby glanced around the diner, checking if anyone was listening, then lowered her voice. "He told me about the custody case. About what I did. So you know you lied." Ruby's face tightened. "I know I testified to something that wasn't the whole truth." "Yes." "Why?" She was quiet for a moment, then pulled a pen from her apron and wrote something on her order pad. She tore off the sheet and set it on the table. "Not here. Come by my house tonight. 7 o'clock. She'd written an address. Before Weldon could respond, she walked away to the kitchen. He sat there, staring at the address, his breakfast forgotten. Ruby Chen wanted to talk, but not in public. That meant she was scared. Of what? Of the Finches. Even here, 3 states away, their reach was that long. His food arrived. He ate mechanically, tasting nothing. Ruby didn't come back to his table. When he finished, he left cash on the table and walked out. Back at the ship, Weldon continued his search. The galley was next. He went through cupboards, checked behind appliances that no longer worked, tapped on walls listening for hollow spaces. Nothing. Then he noticed the floorboards. One section near the stove didn't quite match the rest. Slightly different wood grain, newer nails. He grabbed a pry bar from his toolbox and worked carefully, not wanting to damage anything. The board came up easier than expected. Underneath, wrapped in oilcloth, was a small wooden box. Weldon's hands trembled as he unwrapped it. Inside that were letters, old, folded carefully. The paper yellowed. He opened the first one and saw Sarah's handwriting. "Dear Frank," it began. "I know we haven't always been close, but I need to talk to someone and Weldon can't know yet. He has enough to worry about." Weldon's vision blurred. He blinked hard, forced himself to keep reading. My parents have been visiting more often. Mom especially. She brings doctors, insists I need examinations, says I'm not well, but Frank, I feel fine most days. Just tired. Weldon works so hard and I don't want him to think I'm complaining. Mom says I'm being stubborn, that I don't recognize how sick I am. But I think she's the one who's sick with control. She wants Emma away from us. I can see it in how she talks, how she looks at me. Like I'm failing at being her daughter and Emma deserves better. I don't know what to do. I'm documenting everything like you said, writing down dates, times, what she says. Just in case something happens and Weldon needs proofs. I love him so much, Frank. I wish you two are closer. He needs his father, especially now. Love, Sarah. Weldon set the letter down, pressed his palms against his eyes. Sarah had been afraid, had felt her mother closing in, and she'd tried to protect him by keeping quiet, by handling it alone. There were more letters, each one revealing a little more. Sarah writing about feeling watched, about finding her mother in their house when they weren't home, about conversations where Margaret would hint at taking Emma somewhere safe. Sarah describing symptoms, nausea, headaches, confusion, that came and went without explanation. Sarah, in her last letter, dated 3 days before she died. Frank, I'm scared. I think Mom has been putting something in my food. I know it sounds crazy, but the symptoms only happen after I eat at their house. I'm going to the police after Emma's birthday. I have to wait until then. If I do it now, Mom will find a way to take Emma during the investigation. Please don't tell Weldon yet. I need to handle this carefully. If anything happens to me, make sure he knows I loved him, and make sure Emma knows too. Weldon folded the letter carefully, his hands shaking. Sarah had known. She'd figured it out, and she died 3 days later, before she could go to the police. At the bottom of the box was one more item, a small velvet pouch. Weldon opened it and a ring fell into his palm. Sarah's wedding ring. Simple gold band, worn smooth from years of wear. He closed his fist around it and sat there on the galley floor, surrounded by evidence of a crime no one had investigated, holding the ring of a woman who died trying to protect their daughter. The afternoon passed in a blur. Weldon photographed the letters, stored them carefully back in their box, and hid it again under the floorboards. He couldn't risk anyone finding these. Not yet. Not until he knew what to do with them. At 6:30, he locked up the ship, climbed into his truck, and drove to Ruby Chen's address. It was time to hear what she had to say. Ruby's house sat on a quiet street at the edge of town. Small, neat, with flower boxes in the windows, and a porch light that clicked on as Weldon pulled up. He sat in the truck for a moment, watching the house, wondering what he was walking into. The front door opened before he reached it. Ruby stood there, still in her work clothes, looking smaller somehow outside the diner. "Come in," she said. The living room was comfortable. Worn furniture, family photos on the walls, the smell of something baking. Ruby gestured to the couch, and Weldon sat. She took the chair across from him, hands folded in her lap. "I've been waiting 10 years to have this conversation," she said. "Your father told me you'd come eventually. I just didn't know when." "Tell me about the testimony," Weldon said. "Tell me why you lied." Ruby took a breath. "I didn't lie, exactly. I did see you and Sarah arguing that day. I did hear raised voices, but it wasn't what they made it sound like in court. It was a normal fight, the kind every couple has. You weren't threatening her. You weren't violent. You were just two stressed people trying to figure out how to pay bills and raise a kid. So why make it sound like abuse? Because Margaret Finch told me to." Ruby's voice was steady, but her hands shook slightly. "She came to my house 6 weeks before the hearing. Said she knew I was behind on my mortgage, that the bank was about to foreclose. She had all the details. How much I owed, when the payments were due. I don't know how she got that information, but she had it. Then she made me an offer. Testify about what I'd seen, make it clear you had a temper, and she'd pay off my mortgage. $30,000. And you agreed. I had 2 kids at home. I was going to lose my house. Yes, I agreed. Ruby looked at him directly. I'm not proud of it. I'm not asking for forgiveness. But that's the truth. Margaret Finch bought my testimony, and I let her because I was desperate. Weldon felt anger rising in his chest, but under it was something else. Understanding, maybe. Ruby had been trapped, same as him. Different kind of trapped, but Margaret had known exactly which buttons to push. Your father figured it out, Ruby continued. He came into the diner about a year after the hearing, sat down, ordered coffee, and said he knew what I'd done. I nearly had a heart attack, but he wasn't there to threaten me. He said he was building a case, collecting evidence, and he wanted me to know that when the time came, I'd need to tell the truth. The real truth. He asked if I'd be willing to testify again, this time honestly. What did you say? I said yes. I told him everything, the meeting with Margaret, the money, all of it. He recorded the conversation. I signed an affidavit. It's somewhere in that ship of his, I'm guessing. Weldon nodded slowly. It is. I found the financial records. The payment from Harold Finch's account to your bank. Harold probably didn't even know what it was for, Ruby said. Margaret handles everything. He just signs checks and does what she tells him. You sound like you know them well. Ruby stood up, went to a desk in the corner, and came back with a folder. After your father asked me to document everything, I started paying attention. The Finches own property here. A vacation house about 15 miles outside town. They visit twice a year, always in summer and winter. I started keeping track. Who they meet with, what they talk about in the diner when they think nobody's listening. Your father wanted to know their patterns, their connections. She handed Weldon the folder. Inside were notes, dates, photos. Ruby had done exactly what Frank asked. She'd become an investigator, watching the people who destroyed Weldon's life. There's something else you should know, Ruby said quietly. Margaret Finch isn't just controlling. She's dangerous. 3 years ago, a man in town started asking questions about the Finch family. He was a journalist, working on some story about influential families in the region. He interviewed people, looked at public records. Then one day he left town, suddenly. His car was found abandoned 2 states over. He never finished his story. Never came back. You think Margaret? I don't know. But I know people stopped asking questions after that. Weldon looked at the folder in his hands, felt the weight of what Ruby was saying. He'd been thinking of this as a legal battle, a fight in courtrooms with lawyers and evidence. But if Margaret was willing to make people disappear, why are you still here? He asked. Why didn't you leave after giving my father that statement? Ruby smiled sadly. This is my home. My kids grew up here. I wasn't going to let Margaret Finch drive me away. Besides, your father convinced me I'd be safer staying put, acting normal. If I ran, it would look suspicious. So I stayed. Kept the diner open. Waited. For what? For you. Ruby leaned forward. Your father said when you finally came it would mean you were ready to fight. That you'd have what you needed to take them down. So tell me, are you ready? Weldon thought about Sarah's letters, the logbook, the evidence scattered through the ship. He thought about Emma, 16 years old now, living with her mother's killer. I'm ready, he said. But I need more than what I have. I need something that can't be explained away or buried by expensive lawyers. My father said everything was in the ship. I found a lot, but I'm missing something. Something big. Ruby nodded. Your father mentioned photographs. He said they were the smoking gun, whatever that means. He hid them somewhere on the ship, somewhere only you would think to look. Did he say where? No, but he said you'd understand when you saw them, that they'd make everything clear. Weldon stood up. I need to keep searching. Ruby walked him to the door. Before he left, she put a hand on his arm. Be careful. If Margaret figures out what you're doing, she won't hesitate. She's protected her control over Emma for 10 years. She won't give it up easily. I know. And Weldon, I really am sorry. For what I did. For the part I played in taking your daughter away. Weldon looked at her, this woman who'd been trapped by circumstances, who'd made a terrible choice and had lived with it ever since. He couldn't forgive her, not yet, but he understood. Help me now, he said. Help me get Emma back. That's how you make it right. Ruby nodded. I will. Whatever you need. Weldon drove back to the property as night settled over the fields. The ship loomed in the darkness, massive and silent. He parked, grabbed a flashlight, and climbed aboard. Somewhere in this vessel, his father had hidden photographs. The smoking gun. Evidence so clear, so damning that even Margaret, Finch's lawyers, couldn't explain it away. Weldon stood on the deck, looked up at the stars, and tried to think like his father. Where would Frank Parr hide something that important? Somewhere only Weldon would think to look. Then it hit him. The navigation room. When Weldon was a kid visiting the ship, his father had let him play in the navigation room. It had been his favorite place, full of charts and instruments and the big ship's wheel that young Weldon had pretended to steer. If his father wanted to hide something where only Weldon would find it, that's where it would be. He headed below deck, flashlight cutting through the darkness, and found the navigation room. It was smaller than he remembered, but the wheel was still there, mounted on a pedestal in the center. Charts lined the walls. A desk sat in the corner with drawers and cabinets. Weldon searched methodically. Behind charts, under desk drawers. Inside the pedestal. Nothing. He stood there, frustrated, trying to remember. What had he done as a kid in this room? He'd spun the wheel, yes. He'd looked at charts. He'd hidden things in the wheel's hollow spokes. Weldon knelt down, examined the wheel closely. The spokes were hollow metal tubes. He shone his flashlight into one and saw something inside. He reached in carefully, felt paper, pulled out an envelope. Inside were photographs. Polaroids, dated and labeled. The first showed Margaret and Harold Finch sitting at a restaurant table with a man in a suit. Weldon recognized him immediately. Judge Kenneth Morrison, the judge who'd ruled on his custody case. The date on the photo was 4 months before the hearing. The second photo showed the same 3 people at what looked like a private club, drinks in hand, laughing. 2 months before the hearing, the third showed just Margaret and the judge, close together, his hand on her arm. 1 month before the hearing. Weldon's hands shook as he went through the rest. 12 photographs total, documenting a relationship between Margaret Finch and the judge who'd taken Emma away. Not just professional, not just friendly. These were photos of people who knew each other well, who met regularly, who had the kind of rapport that suggested influence and favors exchanged. At the bottom of the envelope was a note in his father's handwriting. Private investigator took these over 6 months. Morrison and Margaret have been connected for years. He owes her money, borrowed it to cover gambling debts. She owns him. That's why you lost Emma. The fix was in from the start. Weldon sat back against the wall, photographs spread around him, and felt something crack open inside his chest. Not anger this time, something bigger. Certainty. This was it. This was what he needed. The truth, in 12 photographs. Weldon didn't sleep that night. He sat in the captain's quarters, organizing everything he'd found. The photographs went into one envelope, carefully labeled. Sarah's letters into another. The logbook, the financial records, Ruby's affidavit, all of it laid out on the desk like pieces of a puzzle finally coming together. By dawn, he had a plan. He needed a lawyer. Not just any lawyer, but someone good enough to take on the Finches and their resources. Someone who wouldn't be intimidated by money or connections. He pulled out his phone and started searching. 3 hours later, he was on the highway, driving toward the state capital. He'd found a family law firm with a reputation for taking difficult cases. The lead attorney, a woman named Claire Hastings, had agreed to see him that afternoon. Weldon spent the drive rehearsing what he'd say. How do you explain 10 years of injustice in a single meeting? How do you make someone understand what it feels like to have your child taken away based on lies? He'd figure it out. He had to. The law office was in a modern building downtown, all glass and steel. Claire Hastings met him in a conference room, a woman in her 50s with sharp eyes and a no-nonsense demeanor. She listened without interrupting as Weldon explained everything: the custody hearing, his father's investigation, the evidence he'd found. When he finished, she was quiet for a long moment. "This is substantial," she finally said. "The photographs alone would be grounds for appealing the custody decision. Add in the evidence of bribery, the financial records, and your wife's letters. This is bigger than a custody case. This is judicial corruption and possible homicide." "Can we get Emma back?" "Possibly. But it's going to take time. We'd need to file motions, request hearings, potentially bring criminal charges. The Finches will fight every step. They'll hire the best lawyers money can buy." "I don't care how long it takes," Weldon said. "I just need to know it's possible." Claire studied him. "Why now? Why did you wait 10 years?" "I didn't know. Not until I found what my father left me." "And if you'd known 10 years ago?" Weldon thought about it. "I don't know. Maybe I still wouldn't have fought. I was broken then. I couldn't see past the next day, let alone imagine winning against people like the Finches. And now I have a reason. Emma's 16. In 2 years she'll be an adult. This might be my last chance to be her father before she gets to decide for herself whether I'm worth knowing. I can't waste it." Claire nodded slowly. "All right, I'll take your case. But I need you to understand something. This is going to get ugly. The Finches will come after you. They'll dig up everything they can, try to make you look unstable or dangerous. They'll drag Sarah's memory through the mud if they think it'll help. Can you handle that?" "I can handle anything if it means getting my daughter back." "Good. Leave the evidence with me. I'll start reviewing it, building our case. Don't contact the Finches directly. Don't do anything that could be construed as threatening or harassing. Let me handle the legal side." Weldon handed over copies of everything, keeping the originals hidden on the ship. As he left the office, he felt something he hadn't felt in years. Hope. Fragile, uncertain, but real. He drove back to Mercer Springs, stopped at the library on Main Street. If he was going to understand the Finches completely, he needed to know their history. Ruby had mentioned suspicious deaths, disappearances. Weldon wanted to see for himself. The library had public records and old newspapers on microfiche. The librarian, an elderly woman with thick glasses, showed him how to use the machine and left him alone. Weldon started with Margaret's first husband, Thomas Whitmore. The marriage had lasted 3 years before Thomas fell down the stairs at their home. The death was ruled accidental. Thomas had been drinking. The stairs were steep. These things happen. But the police report, which Weldon found in archived news coverage, mentioned a neighbor who'd heard arguing earlier that evening. That neighbor was never called to testify at the inquest. Margaret had inherited Thomas's estate, considerable wealth from a family manufacturing business. She'd been 28 years old. 5 years later, she married Harold Finch. Harold came from old money, less wealthy than Thomas, but with better connections. They had one child, Sarah. Weldon's hands tightened on the microfiche controls. Sarah, his Sarah, raised by a woman who might have killed her own husband. He kept searching. There were other deaths, other incidents in the Finch family orbit. Harold's business partner, who disappeared in 1994. A housekeeper who died in a car accident after working for the Finches for 15 years. A lawyer who represented Margaret in some dispute. He'd committed suicide, according to the obituary, though there were whispered questions about that ruling too. None of it was proof. All of it was suspicious. Weldon photographed every article he found, every mention of the Finch name connected to tragedy or controversy. Then he looked up Judge Kenneth Morrison. Morrison had been appointed to the bench 20 years ago, a rising star in legal circles. But his financial records, available through public disclosure, showed problems. He'd filed for bankruptcy 8 years ago, right around the time Margaret's photos suggested their relationship began. Debts from gambling, according to court documents. Then suddenly the bankruptcy was withdrawn. All debts paid. Weldon knew who'd paid them. He left the library as it was closing, head full of dates and names and connections. The pattern was clear. Margaret Finch was a woman who got what she wanted, and anyone who stood in her way either bent or broke. Sarah had been her daughter, and Margaret had controlled her completely. When Sarah tried to break free, tried to protect Emma from that control, Margaret had eliminated the threat. Then she turned her attention to Weldon. Back at the ship, Weldon found the security he'd improvised the day before, a simple wire across the gangway that would clink if someone passed, had been tripped. Someone had been her. He climbed aboard carefully, listening. The ship was silent. He checked the captain's quarters first. Everything was as he'd left it, but there was a smell. Cigarette smoke, faint but unmistakable. Someone had been in this room. On the desk was a note. Stop digging. Leave town. This is your only warning. No signature. Just 9 words in neat handwriting on plain paper. Weldon crumpled the note, threw it in the corner. They were watching him. The Finches, or someone working for them. They knew he was here. Knew he was looking into their past. Good. Let them know. Let them worry. He went below deck to the engine room. This was where his father had hidden the tape recorder, according to the logbook. Weldon had read the entry but hadn't searched for it yet. Time to find it. The engine room was a maze of empty spaces where machinery had been removed. Weldon worked systematically, checking every corner, every bolt hole, every access panel. After an hour, he found it. A small metal box welded to the underside of a pipe bracket. Inside was an old cassette recorder, the kind from the 1990s, and a handful of tapes. Weldon took them back to the captain's quarters, found a battery-powered tape player in his father's supplies, and pressed play on the first tape. Static, then voices. Frank, I'm calling to give you a courtesy warning. Harold Finch's voice, smooth and controlled. Stay out of this custody matter. It's been decided by the courts. Decided by your wife, bribing witnesses and buying judges. His father's voice, flat and cold. That's a serious accusation. Do you have any proof? I'm working on it. A long pause. Then Harold spoke again, his tone darker. You don't want to go down this road, Frank. Margaret doesn't take challenges well. Things happen to people who get in her way, bad things. I'd hate to see anything happen to you. Is that a threat? It's a fact. Ask Thomas Whitmore. Oh, wait. You can't. He's dead. The line went dead. Weldon sat back, staring at the recorder. Harold had just admitted, on tape, that Margaret was dangerous, that she'd been involved in Thomas's death, and he'd threatened Frank directly. This was evidence of conspiracy, of obstruction, of witness intimidation. Weldon played the next tape. More conversations, more threats, more of Harold revealing exactly how much he knew about what Margaret had done. By the time Weldon finished listening to all the tapes, the sun was setting again. He had everything now, every piece of evidence his father had collected over a decade. Financial records, photographs, audio recordings, witness statements, Sarah's own words. Enough to bring the Finches down. Enough to get Emma back. But first, he had to make sure he survived long enough to use it. Weldon called Claire Hastings the next morning, told her about the threats and the tapes. She was quiet for a long moment before responding. "This changes things," she said. "We're not just talking about custody fraud anymore. This is organized criminal activity, bribery, corruption, potentially murder. I think we need to involve law enforcement." "What about Emma? If we go to the police, the Finches might what? Take her and run?" "Weldon, they don't know how much evidence you have. They're trying to scare you off, but they don't know it's too late. We already have everything we need. Let me make some calls. I know people in the state attorney general's office. They handle public corruption cases." "How long will that take?" "Days, maybe a week. In the meantime, do not stay at that ship alone. Is there somewhere safer you can go?" Weldon thought of Ruby. "Yeah, I have a place." "Good. Use it. And Weldon, watch your back. These people have demonstrated they're willing to do whatever it takes." After the call ended, Weldon packed up the evidence, originals and copies, and loaded everything into his truck. He drove to Ruby's house, knocked on the door. She answered in her diner uniform, about to leave for the morning shift. "I need a favor," Weldon said. "Can you keep some things safe for me?" Ruby took in his expression, the urgency in his voice, and stepped aside. "Come in." He brought in the boxes, explained what he'd found, what the lawyer was doing. Ruby listened, her face growing paler as he described the audio tapes. Harold admitted Margaret killed Thomas. As good as admitted it, implied she's done it before. Will do it again. Ruby sat down heavily. "God, and Emma's been living with her all this time. Not for much longer. Once the state attorney gets involved, they'll move fast. They'll want Emma someplace safe while they investigate. What do you need from me? Keep this evidence here, hidden. If something happens to me, give it to Claire Hastings." He handed her a card with the lawyer's information. "And if you see anything suspicious, anyone asking about me, strangers in town, call the police immediately. You think they'll come after you? I think they're desperate. Desperate people do stupid things." Ruby nodded slowly. "All right. I'll keep it safe. But you need to be careful too. Maybe stay somewhere public. The motel on Route 9 has security cameras." "I'll be fine." Frank said the same thing, right up until he wasn't. Ruby's voice caught. "He was a good man, Weldon. He spent his last years trying to make things right for you. Don't let that be for nothing." Weldon squeezed her shoulder. "I won't." He left Ruby's house and drove back to the ship. But this time he parked a quarter-mile away and approached on foot through the fields. If someone was watching, he wanted to see them first. The ship sat quiet in the afternoon sun. Nothing looked disturbed. But Weldon moved carefully, checking the perimeter before climbing aboard. Inside the captain's quarters, everything was as he'd left it. He sat at the desk, opened his father's logbook to the last page, and read the final entry again. "Weldon, if you're reading this, I'm gone. I'm sorry I wasn't stronger. Sorry I couldn't stop what happened to Sarah. But maybe I can still help you save Emma. The truth is in these walls. Use it. Don't let fear stop you the way it stopped me. Be braver than your old man. Bring your daughter home." Weldon traced his finger over the words. His father had been afraid too. Had been threatened, warned to back off. But he'd kept collecting evidence anyway, knowing it might be dangerous, doing it because it was right, because family mattered more than fear. Weldon's phone buzzed. A text from an unknown number. "We need to talk. Meet me at the diner, 6 p.m. Come alone." HF. Harold Finch. Here in Mercer Springs. Weldon stared at the message. This could be a trap. Could be Harold trying to intimidate him in person or worse. But it could also be an opportunity. Harold had sounded conflicted on those tapes. Complicit, yes, but not enthusiastic. Maybe after 10 years, his conscience was catching up. Weldon texted back, "I'll be there." At 6 o'clock, Weldon walked into Ruby's place. Harold Finch sat alone in a back booth, looking older than Weldon remembered. Gray hair, deep lines around his eyes, the bearing of a man who'd spent too many years carrying weight he didn't ask for. Ruby caught Weldon's eye from behind the counter, concern written on her face. Weldon nodded slightly, "I'm okay," and slid into the booth across from Harold. "You look like your father," Harold said. No greeting, no small talk. "So I've been told." Frank was a stubborn man, wouldn't let things go. He was a good man. He protected his family. Harold winced at that. Yes, I suppose he did. He looked down at his coffee cup, turned it slowly. "I'm not here to threaten you, Weldon. I'm here to tell you the truth. The truth I should have told 10 years ago. I'm listening. Margaret killed Sarah." The words came out flat, emotionless. "I didn't know it at the time. I suspected, but I didn't want to believe it. Sarah was her daughter. Mothers don't..." He stopped, shook his head. "But Margaret isn't like other mothers. She's not like other people." "How did she do it?" "Arsenic. Small amounts over weeks. Made Sarah sick, but not obviously poisoned. The doctors couldn't figure out what was wrong because they weren't looking for poison. By the time Sarah realized what was happening, it was too late. The final dose caused the hemorrhage." Weldon's hands clenched under the table. "And you knew this?" "I suspected. After Sarah died, I found Margaret's computer unlocked. She'd been researching poisons, symptoms, lethal doses. I confronted her. She told me Sarah was planning to leave, take Emma away, cut us out completely. Margaret couldn't allow that. She said it was necessary." Necessary. That's what she called it. Like murder was just another task on a list. Harold looked up, met Weldon's eyes. "I should have gone to the police. Should have turned her in. But she's my wife, and she knows things about me, things that would destroy what's left of my life. So I stayed quiet. Helped her get custody of Emma. Became complicit in all of it." "Why tell me now?" "Because I'm dying." Harold said it simply. "Cancer. 6 months, maybe less. And I don't want to die knowing I let my granddaughter stay with a monster. Emma deserves better. She deserves the truth. She deserves you." Weldon studied Harold's face, looking for deception, but all he saw was exhaustion and regret. "There's something else," Harold continued. "Margaret knows you're here. She knows what you're looking for. She called me yesterday, told me to handle it, to make you disappear if necessary. And are you going to make me disappear?" "No, I'm going to help you. I'll testify. I'll give you everything I know, financial records, her research, communications between Margaret and Judge Morrison. All of it. I'll destroy my own life if it means stopping her. Why should I trust you? Because I'm Emma's grandfather, and I failed her once. I won't fail her again." Harold pulled an envelope from his jacket, slid it across the table. "This is everything I have. Bank records showing payments to Morrison and others. Emails between Margaret and the judge arranging your custody hearing. Her poison research on our home computer. I copied it all before she could delete it. Use it. Bring Margaret down. Save Emma." Weldon took the envelope, felt the weight of it. "What about you? When this comes out?" "I'll go to prison. I'm okay with that. I deserve it." Harold stood up slowly. "Tell Emma I'm sorry. Tell her I loved her, even if I didn't show it the right way." He walked out of the diner without looking back. Weldon sat there, envelope in hand, watching through the window as Harold climbed into a car and drove away. Ruby came over with fresh coffee. Was that Harold Finch? He just confessed to being an accessory to murder and gave me everything I need to prove it. Ruby sat down across from him. What now? Now I call my lawyer, and then we end this. Weldon pulled out his phone, dialed Claire Hastings, and told her what had just happened. She listened, asked a few sharp questions, then said what he'd been hoping to hear. I'm calling the state attorney tonight. This is enough for an arrest warrant. They'll move fast, probably within 24 hours. Where's Emma now? With Margaret at their house 3 states away. I'll make sure the local authorities do a welfare check, get her to safety before they arrest Margaret. You should probably stay where you are. You're going to need to give statements, testify eventually. Whatever it takes. After the call, Weldon sat in the quiet diner, feeling the weight of 10 years lift slowly from his shoulders. It wasn't over yet. There would be hearings, trials, testimony. But the path forward was clear now. He was going to get his daughter back, and Margaret Finch was going to pay for what she'd done. Weldon woke the next morning in the captain's quarters to his phone ringing. Claire Hastings, calling earlier than expected. We have a problem, she said without preamble. Harold Finch is dead. Weldon sat up, suddenly cold. What happened? Car accident. Single vehicle. Went off a bridge about 20 miles from Mercer Springs. Happened around midnight. Police are calling it an accident. He was driving too fast. Lost control. But the timing is suspicious. Margaret. That's my thought too. But proving it is another matter. Harold's confession dies with him now. The evidence he gave you is still valid, but without his testimony, we still have everything else. My father's investigation, the tapes, the photographs. Yes, but Harold was our smoking gun. He was going to testify that Margaret killed Sarah. Now it's circumstantial evidence and a dead witness. Any defense lawyer worth their salary will tear it apart. Weldon stood, paced the small cabin. So what do we do? We move forward with what we have. The state attorney is still interested. Judicial corruption is enough to proceed. But the murder case against Margaret just got a lot weaker. I'm sorry, Weldon. After the call ended, Weldon sat at the desk, staring at Harold's envelope. The man had tried to do the right thing, finally, and it had killed him. Margaret had reached out from 3 states away and eliminated the threat. How long before she came for Weldon? He needed to think, needed to figure out what he was missing. His father had said everything was in the ship. The truth was in these walls. But what if there was more? What if Frank had hidden something even bigger, something that would make Harold's testimony unnecessary? Weldon went back to the logbook, read through it again more carefully. Most of it he'd already found. The financial records, the photos, the tapes. But there was one entry he'd glossed over. A reference to a safety deposit box. Transferred the medical records to the bank today. Box 247, First National in Millerton. The key is where Weldon keeps his secrets. Where Weldon keeps his secrets. He thought back to childhood visits to the ship. Where had he hidden things? He'd tucked treasures in the ship's wheel. That's where the photographs were. He'd stashed notes in the galley. That's where Sarah's letters had been. Where else? The anchor chain locker. He'd hidden there once during a game of hide-and-seek with his father. It had been his favorite hiding spot because Frank had always pretended he couldn't find him. Weldon went below, found the anchor locker. It was a cramped space, dark and musty. He squeezed inside, shone his flashlight around. The chains were long gone, but the brackets remained. He ran his hands along the walls, feeling for anything unusual. There. A loose panel, painted over but slightly raised. He worked it free with a screwdriver from his toolbox. Behind it was a small metal box. Inside, wrapped in oilcloth, was a key and a note. Box 247. This is the proof that seals it. Sarah's medical records from the weeks before her death. Tests she ordered privately, without Margaret knowing. The toxicology results came back after Sarah died, arsenic levels that should have been lethal. I had to pay a lot of money to get these records before they disappeared. Use them. Make sure Sarah's death means something. Weldon clutched the key, his hand shaking. His father had obtained Sarah's actual medical records, the proof of poisoning. This wasn't circumstantial. This was hard science. He checked the note for the bank's location. Millerton, about 2 hours away. He could get there before it closed. Weldon locked up the ship, drove to Ruby's house, and told her where he was going. She insisted on coming with him. "You're not doing this alone," she said. "Not after what happened to Harold." They drove together, Ruby riding shotgun, both of them watching for cars that might be following. The roads were empty. When they reached Millerton, the bank was a small brick building on Main Street. They parked and went inside. The clerk led them to the vault, used the bank's key and Weldon's key to open box 247. Inside was a thick manila envelope. Weldon carried it back to a private room, opened it with hands that wouldn't quite steady. Medical records. Dozens of pages. Lab tests ordered by Sarah's doctor in the weeks before her death. Blood work, urinalysis, comprehensive metabolic panels. Notes from multiple appointments where Sarah described her symptoms. Fatigue, nausea, confusion, muscle weakness. And at the bottom, a toxicology report dated 3 days after Sarah's death. Elevated arsenic levels detected, 2.3 mg/L. Normal range, 0.02 mg/L. Levels consistent with chronic exposure. Recommend immediate investigation for poisoning. The report was signed by the lab director, stamped official, with a note clipped to it. This report was sent to the medical examiner's office as required. However, ME ruled death as natural causes, hemorrhage, before toxicology results were reviewed. When I called to follow up, I was told the case was closed and further investigation was not warranted. I maintained the original results in case they were ever needed. Dr. Patricia Wong, Chief Toxicologist. Weldon read it twice, 3 times. Sarah had been poisoned. The lab had caught it. The report had gone to the medical examiner and then been ignored or buried. Someone paid off the medical examiner, Ruby said quietly, or scared him off. Otherwise, he would have reopened the case. Weldon looked through the rest of the envelope. There were copies of Sarah's private journal entries, notes she'd made about feeling sick after eating at her parents' house, photos she'd taken of medications in Margaret's bathroom, pills Sarah didn't recognize. A letter Sarah had written but never sent, addressed to Weldon. "My love, if you're reading this, something happened to me. I need you to know it wasn't an accident. My mother has been poisoning me. I know how it sounds, but I have proof. I've been documenting everything, running tests. The results are hidden in the same place I keep my grandmother's ring, the little wooden box in the attic. Please, if I die, make sure Emma is safe. Don't let my mother near her. Margaret isn't well. She can't let go, can't let me be independent. She'd rather kill me than lose control. I'm so sorry I didn't tell you sooner. I thought I could handle it alone. I was wrong. I love you. Protect our daughter. Sarah." Weldon's vision blurred. Ruby put a hand on his arm. "She knew," Weldon said, his voice breaking. "She knew, and she tried to protect Emma. And I didn't see it. I didn't help her. You didn't know. Margaret made sure you didn't know. That's what abusers do. They isolate. They control. They make their victims feel like they can't ask for help." Weldon wiped his eyes, looked at the medical records again. "This is it. This is what we needed. Margaret poisoned Sarah. The lab caught it and the medical examiner buried it. My father found the records and kept them safe. What do we do now? We take this to Claire. We take it to the state attorney, and we make sure Margaret never hurts anyone again. They drove back to Mercer Springs with the evidence secured in Weldon's truck. The sun was setting by the time they arrived. Weldon called Claire immediately, explained what they'd found. "This changes everything," Claire said, and he could hear the excitement in her voice. "With these medical records, we can prove murder. Not just corruption, not just fraud, actual murder. The state attorney will have to move on this immediately. I'm calling them now." "How long?" "Hours. Maybe a day. They'll want Emma in protective custody before they arrest Margaret. I'll make sure they move fast." "Thank you. Weldon, you did it. You found the truth. Your father would be proud." After the call, Weldon sat in his truck outside Ruby's house, holding Sarah's letter. He read it one more time, memorizing her words. Then he folded it carefully and put it in his wallet, close to his heart. Sarah had tried to save Emma. Now he would finish what she started. Ruby knocked on the window. "Come inside. No point sitting out here alone." "Just give me a minute. Weldon, I need a minute. Please." Ruby nodded and went inside. Weldon sat in the truck, watched the stars come out, and thought about Sarah. About the life they'd had, and the one they'd been building. About Emma, who'd lost her mother and then her father because of one woman's need for control. His phone buzzed. A text from Claire. "State attorney is moving. Arrest warrant issued for Margaret Finch. Police are picking up Emma now, taking her to a safe location." It's happening. Weldon read the message again and again, barely believing it. After 10 years, Emma was finally going to be safe. He started the truck, drove to the ship one last time. He wanted to be there, in his father's quarters, when it was over. Wanted Frank to know, somehow, that it had worked. That the evidence he'd collected had finally brought justice. Weldon climbed aboard, went to the captain's quarters, and sat at the desk where his father had written the logbook. He opened it to the last page, read the final entry again. Then he picked up a pen and wrote his own entry below it. "Dad, I found everything. I found the truth. Emma's safe now. Margaret will answer for what she did. You gave me the tools to fight back, and I used them. Thank you for not giving up. Thank you for protecting us even when I thought you'd walked away. I wish you were here to see this. I wish I'd understood sooner. But at least now, finally, it's done. We won. Weldon." He set down the pen, closed the logbook, and sat in the quiet of the ship, waiting for news that would change everything. The call came at midnight. Claire Hastings, her voice tight with controlled urgency. "There's a problem. Emma's gone." Weldon's blood went cold. "What do you mean gone?" "Police went to the Finch residence to execute the warrant and pick up Emma. The house was empty. Neighbors said they saw Margaret and Emma leave this afternoon with suitcases. No one knows where they went. She ran. Margaret knew we were coming. It looks that way. The state attorney has issued an Amber Alert and a warrant for Margaret's arrest on kidnapping charges in addition to the murder warrant. Every law enforcement agency in 3 states is looking for them. But Weldon, Margaret has resources. Money, connections, places to hide. This could take time. Emma's been with her for 10 years. Why would she run with Margaret now? Because Emma doesn't know the truth yet. Margaret probably told her some story, that they need to take a trip, that people are trying to hurt them, something to make Emma cooperate. The girl has no reason not to believe her grandmother. Weldon stood up, started pacing. The ship creaked around him. We have to find them. I can't, after coming this far, I can't lose her again. The authorities are doing everything they can. In the meantime, I need you to think. Is there anywhere Margaret might go? Property the Finches own? Friends they might stay with? Anywhere she'd feel safe? I don't know. I never knew them that well. What about Ruby? She's been tracking the Finches for years. Would she have ideas? Weldon grabbed his keys, ran for the truck. I'll ask her now. He drove to Ruby's house, pounded on the door until she answered in her robe, bleary-eyed. Weldon, what's wrong? Margaret took Emma and ran. They're gone. I need your notes, everything you documented about the Finches. There has to be something in there, someplace she'd go. Ruby went immediately to her desk, pulled out the folder she'd shown Weldon before. They spread the papers across her dining room table. They have the vacation house here in Mercer Springs, Ruby said, but that's too obvious. Police will check there first. What else? Other properties? Harold's family had a cabin in the mountains, but that was sold years ago. Margaret's parents owned land in Tennessee, but that went to her sister. Ruby flipped through pages. Wait, there's this. Margaret made regular trips to a small town in Pennsylvania, Smithfield. I documented it because it seemed odd. She'd go there 3 or 4 times a year, always alone, always for just a day or two. Did your notes say why? No, I assumed it was business related. But now that I think about it, she never mentioned business when she talked about those trips. She said she was visiting a friend. Weldon pulled out his phone, searched for Smithfield, Pennsylvania. Population barely 1,000. Rural, isolated. A friend. Do you know who? No. I never asked, and she never said. But if Margaret has a friend in a place that remote, someone she's trusted for years, that might be where she'd go. I'm going there. Weldon, you should let the police are searching everywhere. They don't know about Smithfield. I do. This is my only advantage. Ruby grabbed her keys. Then I'm going with you. You need someone watching your back. Ruby, don't argue. I've been complicit in this mess for 10 years. Let me help fix it. They drove through the night. The roads empty. The truck's headlights cutting through darkness. Weldon's mind raced. What would he say to Emma? How would he explain 10 years of absence? Would she even believe him? She'll be confused, Ruby said as if reading his thoughts. Margaret has been her whole world for a decade. You're going to be a stranger to her. I know. But you're also her father. That has to count for something. Weldon wanted to believe that. But belief felt fragile right now, easily shattered. They reached Smithfield just after dawn. The town was smaller than Mercer Springs. One main street, a few houses scattered along country roads, fields and forests beyond. They stopped at a gas station, the only place open this early. The attendant, an older man with weathered hands, looked at them with mild curiosity. Help you folks? We're looking for someone, Weldon said. A woman named Margaret Finch. She might have a friend here. Someone she visits. The attendant's expression closed off. Don't know anyone by that name. Please, it's important. My daughter is with her. Still don't know her. Ruby stepped forward. She's in her 60s, well-dressed, probably drives an expensive car. She would have arrived yesterday with a teenage girl. The attendant shook his head, turned away. Can't help you. Back in the truck, Weldon hit the steering wheel in frustration. He's lying. He knows something. Small towns protect their own, Ruby said. If Margaret's friend lives here, the whole town probably knows about it, but they won't tell strangers. Then how do we find her? Ruby thought for a moment. We look for the expensive car. There can't be many in a place this small. They drove slowly through town, checking driveways and side streets. Most cars were trucks, older sedans, practical vehicles. Then, parked behind a modest house at the edge of town, Weldon saw it. A black Mercedes, new, with out-of-state plates. That's it, he said. The house was painted white, surrounded by a neat garden. Smoke rose from the chimney. Everything looked peaceful, normal. But Weldon's heart pounded as he parked across the street. What's the plan? Ruby asked. I go knock on the door. And if Margaret answers? I don't know. I'll figure it out. That's not a plan, Weldon. It's what I have. He got out of the truck, crossed the street, walked up the path to the front door. His hand shook as he raised it to knock. But before he could, the door opened. A woman stood there, mid-60s, grey hair pulled back. Not Margaret. Someone else. Her eyes widened when she saw Weldon. Who are you? My name is Weldon Parr. I'm looking for my daughter, Emma. I believe she's here with Margaret Finch. The woman's hand tightened on the door frame. I don't know what you're talking about. Please, I'm not here to cause trouble. I just need to see my daughter. I need to know she's safe. You need to leave, now. Is Emma here? I said leave. Behind the woman, a voice called out. Aunt Linda, who is it? Emma. Weldon's breath caught. He'd know that voice anywhere, even after 10 years. Older now, but still his daughter. No one, the woman, Linda, called back. Just someone who has the wrong house. Please, Weldon said quietly. Just let me see her. 5 minutes. That's all I'm asking. You need to go before I call the police. Good, call them. They're looking for Margaret anyway. There's a warrant for her arrest, for murder. Linda's face went pale. What? Margaret killed my wife. Poisoned her. Then she bribed witnesses and a judge to take Emma away from me. I have proof. The police have proof. Emma is in danger as long as she's with Margaret. That's Margaret wouldn't, so ask her. Ask Margaret about Sarah's death. About Thomas Whitmore. About Harold. Ask her why she ran when the police came. Linda stepped back, uncertainty on her face. Wait here. She closed the door. Weldon stood on the porch, barely breathing. Ruby had gotten out of the truck, stood at the edge of the yard in case he needed backup. Minutes passed. Then the door opened again. This time, Margaret stood there. She looked exactly as Weldon remembered. Poised, controlled, coldly elegant even in casual clothes. But there was something new in her eyes. Desperation. Hello, Weldon, she said. It's been a long time. Where's Emma? Safe. She's upstairs, unaware of this dramatic scene you're causing. Dramatic. You kidnapped her. There's a warrant for your arrest. For murder, yes, Linda mentioned. How enterprising of you, finding your father's little treasure trove of lies and half-truths. Frank always was better at documentation than actual parenting. He was protecting me. Protecting Emma. From what? A grandmother who loves her. Who raised her, gave her stability, made sure she had every advantage. From the woman who murdered her mother. Margaret's expression didn't change. If you're expecting me to break down and confess, you'll be disappointed. I did what was necessary. Sarah was weak, unstable, planning to take Emma away and raise her in poverty with a father who could barely support himself. I gave Emma the life she deserved. By killing Sarah. By removing an obstacle. Sarah would have destroyed that child's future out of some misguided idea of independence. I prevented that. Weldon stared at her, this woman who spoke about murder like it was a business decision. You're insane. I'm pragmatic. There's a difference. Now, unless you have police with you, which I notice you don't, I suggest you leave. Emma is happy. She's safe. She doesn't need a father who abandoned her 10 years ago. I didn't abandon her. You took her. Semantics. The result is the same. She doesn't remember you. She doesn't want you. You're a stranger. Then let her tell me that herself. No. Why? If you're so sure she doesn't want me, what are you afraid of? I'm not afraid of anything. I'm simply protecting Emma from unnecessary trauma. Let me talk to her. 5 minutes. Absolutely not. Then I'll call the police right now. They'll surround this house, arrest you, take Emma into protective custody. Is that what you want? Margaret's eyes narrowed. You're bluffing. If you were going to call the police, you would have done it already. She was right. Weldon hadn't called them because he wanted to see Emma first, wanted to explain things himself before law enforcement got involved. But maybe that was a mistake. He pulled out his phone. "Wait," Margaret said. "Let's be rational. You want to see Emma. I want to protect her. Perhaps we can reach an arrangement." "What kind of arrangement?" "You leave. Go back to whatever life you've built. I'll take Emma somewhere safe. Somewhere you and the police won't find us. In a few years, when she's an adult, she can decide for herself whether to contact you. You're offering to let me give up my daughter in exchange for you not getting arrested. I'm offering you a chance to avoid traumatizing Emma with the truth about what I did. Do you really want her to know I killed her mother, that her grandmother is a murderer? That knowledge will destroy her. She deserves the truth. The truth will hurt her. Ignorance will protect her. You don't get to make that choice. I already did, 10 years ago. And I'll keep making it." Weldon pressed dial on his phone. "Then I guess we're done talking." Margaret's composure cracked slightly. "Weldon, don't—" the emergency dispatcher answered. 911, what's your emergency?" Before Weldon could speak, a voice called from inside the house. "Grandma, what's going on?" Emma appeared in the doorway behind Margaret, and Weldon's world stopped. She was 16 now, tall and slim, with Sarah's dark hair and his own blue eyes. She wore jeans and an oversized sweater, looked tired and confused. But she was beautiful. Perfect. His daughter. "Sir?" The dispatcher's voice came through the phone. "Are you there? What's your emergency?" "I'm at 247 Maple Street in Smithfield, Pennsylvania," Weldon said, not taking his eyes off Emma. "I need police here immediately. Margaret Finch is here. There's an active warrant for her arrest." Margaret's face went white. "Emma, go upstairs." "What's happening?" Emma looked between them. "Who is that man?" "Nobody important. Just go upstairs, please." "Police are on their way," the dispatcher said. "Stay on the line." Emma didn't move. She stared at Weldon, recognition flickering in her eyes. "I know you, from pictures. I'm your father," Weldon said quietly. His voice broke on the last word. Emma's expression shifted through confusion, disbelief, shock. "No. Your grandma said you were dead." "I know what she told you, but I'm here. I'm alive. I've been looking for you for 10 years. "That's not—" Emma turned to Margaret. "You said he died when I was little. You said—" "I said what was necessary to protect you," Margaret said, her voice firm. "This man abandoned you. I gave you a home, a life. Everything you have is because of me. You lied to me. For 10 years you lied. I protected you from a painful truth." "What truth?" Emma's voice rose. "That my father was alive and you kept him from me. That your father was unfit, that he couldn't care for you properly, that you were better off without him." Weldon stepped forward slightly. "Emma, your grandmother is lying. She took you from me through fraud and bribery. I never abandoned you. I fought to keep you and she made sure I lost. Why should I believe you? I don't even know you." "I know. And I'm sorry for that. But I can prove everything I'm saying. Your grandfather, Harold, he confessed before he died. He told me what Margaret did." Emma's face crumpled. "Grandpa is dead?" "I'm sorry. It was an accident." "When?" 2 days ago." Emma turned to Margaret, tears in her eyes. "You didn't tell me. Grandpa died and you didn't tell me. I was protecting you from grief. We had to leave quickly. Stop lying to me." Emma's voice cracked. "Just stop. Please." In the distance, sirens wailed. Getting closer, Margaret's composure finally broke. "Emma, listen to me. We need to leave. Right now. Before the police get here." "Leave? Why?" "Because they're going to arrest me. They're going to take you away from me. And they're going to tell you things, terrible things about me that aren't true." What things? Lies. All lies. Weldon has convinced them I did something to your mother, that I hurt Sarah. But I loved her. I loved her and I love you, and I've only ever tried to protect you both. Emma looked at Weldon. Is that true? Did she hurt my mom? Weldon wanted to say yes. Wanted to tell Emma everything right then, but he also saw the fear and confusion on his daughter's face. Saw how fragile she was in this moment. If he pushed too hard, he might lose her forever. I have evidence, he said carefully. Evidence that your mother's death wasn't an accident, but this isn't the time or place to talk about it. The police are coming. They'll help sort everything out. I don't understand any of this. Emma wrapped her arms around herself. This morning I woke up and everything was normal. Now Grandpa's dead and Grandma's being arrested and my father is apparently alive and I can't. She started crying. Weldon's instinct was to go to her, to comfort her, but he stopped himself. He was still a stranger. She'd pull away if he tried. Ruby stepped forward from the yard. Emma, my name is Ruby. I'm a friend of your father's. I know you're scared and confused, but I promise you, we're going to help you understand everything. Okay? Emma nodded, wiping her eyes. The police cars pulled up, lights flashing. Officers got out, hands on weapons. The scene suddenly felt dangerous, charged. Margaret Finch, one officer called. We have a warrant for your arrest. Margaret straightened, composed herself. For a moment she looked like she might run. But where would she go? She was surrounded. This is a mistake, she said. A terrible misunderstanding. You can explain that at the station. Please step away from the door with your hands visible. Margaret looked at Emma one last time. Remember that I love you. Whatever they tell you, whatever lies they spread, remember that everything I did was for you. Then she walked forward, hands raised, and let the officers cuff her. Emma watched, frozen, as they led her grandmother to the police car. She looked lost, broken, like a whole world had just shattered, which Weldon realized it had. An officer approached Weldon. You're Weldon Parr? Yes. I need you to come to the station, give a statement. The girl, too. Can I ride with her? Make sure she's okay. The officer looked at Emma, then back at Weldon. That's up to her. Weldon turned to his daughter. Emma, would that be okay? Emma stared at him for a long moment. Then slowly she nodded. It wasn't much, but it was a start. The police station was small, just a few rooms and a holding area. They put Margaret in a cell and took Emma and Weldon to separate interview rooms. Weldon gave his statement first. Everything from finding the shit to the evidence his father collected, to Harold's confession. The detective listened, took notes, asked clarifying questions. We'll need time to verify everything, the detective said. But based on what the state attorney already sent us, plus your statement, we have enough to hold Ms. Finch pending trial. The girl, Emma, she'll need to be placed with social services temporarily. No, Weldon said. She's my daughter. I'm her father. With all due respect, sir, you haven't had custody in 10 years. We can't just hand her over without proper procedures. Then what happens to her? Foster care, most likely. Just until we can sort out the legal situation. Weldon felt panic rising. She's been through enough. Don't put her in foster care with strangers. I understand your concern, but what if I could get emergency custody? Right now, my lawyer can file papers. The detective hesitated. That would still take time. Days, at least. In the meantime, I'll stay with him. They both turned. Emma stood in the doorway, an officer behind her. She looked pale but determined. I gave my statement, she continued. They said I have to go to foster care, but I don't want that. If he's really my father, I want to stay with him, at least until this gets sorted out. The detective looked uncomfortable. Miss Finch. Parr. My name is Emma Parr. Weldon's chest tightened at hearing her say his name. Miss Parr, the detective corrected. I understand this is difficult, but we have procedures. I'm 16 years old enough to have a say in where I go. And I'm saying I want to stay with my father. She looked at Weldon. If that's okay with you. Of course it is, Weldon said, his voice rough. More than okay. The detective sighed, made a phone call, consulted with someone. Finally he came back. All right, given the unusual circumstances and Miss Parr's age and preferences, we can place her with you temporarily, but you'll need to stay local until this is resolved. No leaving the state, and you'll need to check in daily. We can do that, Weldon said. There's a motel a few blocks from here. I suggest you get a room. The state attorney will want to meet with both of you tomorrow. They left the station together, Emma walking a few feet away from Weldon, arms wrapped around herself. Ruby had stayed at the station to give her own statement, so it was just the two of them. The silence felt heavy. Are you hungry? Weldon asked. We could get food. I don't know, maybe. There's a diner across the street. They sat in a booth, neither of them touching the menus. Emma stared at the table. Weldon watched her, still hardly believing she was here. I don't know what to say to you, Emma finally said. I don't know how to do this. Neither do I, Weldon admitted. But maybe we can figure it out together. Did you really fight for me? 10 years ago? Yes. I showed up to every court date, every supervised visit. I tried everything I could think of, but your grandmother had money and lawyers, and she paid people to lie about me. I couldn't win. Why didn't you keep trying? Because every time I saw you, you cried when I had to leave. Because the visits were hurting you more than helping. Because I was broken and didn't know how to fight anymore. He paused. That's not an excuse. I should have been stronger, should have found another way. I'm sorry. Emma was quiet for a long time. She told me you didn't want me. That you'd moved on, started a new life, forgot about me. I never forgot. Not for one day. Do you have proof of what she did to my mom? Yes. Medical records, toxicology reports, witness statements. Your mother was poisoned with arsenic. She knew what was happening at the end and she tried to protect you. Emma's eyes filled with tears. I don't remember her. I was so little when she died. Grandma said she was sick, that it was natural, that nobody could have prevented it. She was sick because Margaret was poisoning her. Your mother figured it out, but she died before she could go to the police. Why would Grandma kill her own daughter? Because your mom was planning to take you away, to move somewhere Margaret couldn't control you both. Margaret couldn't allow that. So she murdered her. Emma said it flatly, like she was testing the words. My grandmother murdered my mother to keep me. Yes. Emma put her face in her hands and sobbed. Not quiet tears, but deep, wrenching sobs that shook her whole body. Weldon moved to sit beside her, put his arm around her shoulders. She didn't pull away. They sat like that for a long time, Emma crying for the mother she'd lost and the grandmother she'd just discovered was a monster, while Weldon held his daughter for the first time in 10 years. When Emma finally stopped crying, she pulled away slightly, wiped her eyes. I want to see the evidence, all of it. I need to understand what happened. Are you sure? I'm sure. She's been lying to me my whole life. I want to know the truth. Okay. Tomorrow, I'll show you everything. Tomorrow, Emma agreed. They got a room at the motel, 2 beds, threadbare but clean. Emma took the bed by the window, curled up with her back to him. Weldon lay awake, listening to her breathe, still hardly believing she was here, his daughter. After 10 years of grief and loss and fighting, she was here. They had a long road ahead. Trust to rebuild, trauma to heal, a lifetime of absence to somehow bridge. But they had time now. They had a chance. That was more than Weldon had dared to hope for in years. He closed his eyes and slept better than he had in a decade. The police station was small, just a few rooms and a holding area. They put Margaret in a cell and took Emma and Weldon to separate interview rooms. Weldon gave his statement first. Everything from finding the ship to the evidence his father collected to Harold's confession. The detective listened, took notes, asked clarifying questions. "We'll need time to verify everything," the detective said. "But based on what the state attorney already sent us, plus your statement, we have enough to hold Ms. Finch pending trial. The girl, Emma, she'll need to be placed with social services temporarily." "No," Weldon said. "She's my daughter. I'm her father. With all due respect, sir, you haven't had custody in 10 years. We can't just hand her over without proper procedures." "Then what happens to her?" "Foster care, most likely. Just until we can sort out the legal situation." Weldon felt panic rising. "She's been through enough. Don't put her in foster care with strangers." "I understand your concern, but what if I could get emergency custody?" "Right now, my lawyer can file papers." The detective hesitated. "That would still take time, days at least. In the meantime, I'll stay with him." They both turned. Emma stood in the doorway, an officer behind her. She looked pale but determined. "I gave my statement," she continued. "They said I have to go to foster care, but I don't want that. If he's really my father, I want to stay with him, at least until this gets sorted out." The detective looked uncomfortable. "Miss Finch." "Parr. My name is Emma Parr." Weldon's chest tightened at hearing her say his name. "Miss Parr," the detective corrected. "I understand this is difficult, but we have procedures. I'm 16 years old enough to have a say in where I go, and I'm saying I want to stay with my father." She looked at Weldon. "If that's okay with you." "Of course it is," Weldon said, his voice rough. "More than okay." The detective sighed, made a phone call, consulted with someone. Finally, he came back. "All right. Given the unusual circumstances and Miss Parr's age and preferences, we can place her with you temporarily, but you'll need to stay local until this is resolved. No leaving the state, and you'll need to check in daily." "We can do that," Weldon said. "There's a motel a few blocks from here. I suggest you get a room. The state attorney will want to meet with both of you tomorrow." They left the station together, Emma walking a few feet away from Weldon, arms wrapped around herself. Ruby had stayed at the station to give her own statement, so it was just the two of them. The silence felt heavy. "Are you hungry?" Weldon asked. "We could get food." "I don't know, maybe. There's a diner across the street." They sat in a booth, neither of them touching the menus. Emma stared at the table. Weldon watched her, still hardly believing she was here. "I don't know what to say to you," Emma finally said. "I don't know how to do this." "Neither do I," Weldon admitted. "But maybe we can figure it out together." "Did you really fight for me? 10 years ago?" "Yes. I showed up to every court date, every supervised visit. I tried everything I could think of. But your grandmother had money and lawyers, and she'd paid people to lie about me. I couldn't win. Why didn't you keep trying?" "Because every time I saw you, you cried when I had to leave, because the visits were hurting you more than helping, because I was broken and didn't know how to fight anymore." He paused. "That's not an excuse. I should have been stronger, should have found another way. I'm sorry." Emma was quiet for a long time. "She told me you didn't want me, that you'd moved on, started a new life, forgot about me." "I never forgot, not for one day." "Do you have proof of what she did to my mom?" "Yes. Medical records, toxicology reports, witness statements. Your mother was poisoned with arsenic. She knew what was happening at the end, and she tried to protect you." Emma's eyes filled with tears. I don't remember her. I was so little when she died. Grandma said she was sick, that it was natural, that nobody could have prevented it. She was sick because Margaret was poisoning her. Your mother figured it out, but she died before she could go to the police. Why would Grandma kill her own daughter? Because your mom was planning to take you away. To move somewhere Margaret couldn't control you both. Margaret couldn't allow that. So she murdered her. Emma said it flatly, like she was testing the words. My grandmother murdered my mother to keep me. Yes. Emma put her face in her hands and sobbed. Not quiet tears, but deep, wrenching sobs that shook her whole body. Weldon moved to sit beside her, put his arm around her shoulders. She didn't pull away. They sat like that for a long time, Emma crying for the mother she'd lost, and the grandmother she'd just discovered was a monster, while Weldon held his daughter for the first time in 10 years. When Emma finally stopped crying, she pulled away slightly, wiped her eyes. I want to see the evidence. All of it. I need to understand what happened. Are you sure? I'm sure. She's been lying to me my whole life. I want to know the truth. Okay. Tomorrow, I'll show you everything. Tomorrow, Emma agreed. They got a room at the motel. 2 beds, threadbare, but clean. Emma took the bed by the window, curled up with her back to him. Weldon lay awake, listening to her breathe, still hardly believing she was here, his daughter. After 10 years of grief and loss and fighting, she was here. They had a long road ahead, trust to rebuild, trauma to heal, a lifetime of absence to somehow bridge. But they had time now. They had a chance. That was more than Weldon had dared to hope for in years. He closed his eyes and slept better than he had in a decade. 3 months passed like water finding its level. Slowly, inevitably, reshaping everything in its path. Margaret Finch stood trial for the murder of Sarah Parr. The evidence was overwhelming. Medical records, toxicology reports, Harold's recorded confessions, Sarah's own letters documenting the poisoning. The jury deliberated for less than 4 hours before returning a guilty verdict. Life in prison without possibility of parole. Emma attended every day of the trial, sitting beside Weldon in the courtroom. She needed to hear it all, she said. Needed to understand exactly what had happened and why. Weldon worried it was too much, but Claire assured him Emma was stronger than she looked. That bearing witness was part of her healing. On the day of sentencing, Margaret looked at Emma one final time. I love you, she said. Everything I did for you. Emma didn't respond. She just stood, took Weldon's hand, and walked out of the courtroom. The custody hearing was simpler. Judge Morrison had been removed from the bench pending his own trial for corruption. The new judge reviewed the evidence, listened to Emma's testimony about wanting to live with her father, and ruled immediately. Full custody to Weldon Parr, effective immediately. Emma cried when the judge read the ruling. Happy tears this time. Relief. They drove back to Mercer Springs that afternoon. Emma had insisted on seeing the ship, the place where her grandfather had hidden all the evidence that set her free. Weldon had spent the last few weeks making it more presentable, cleaning out years of rust and decay, repairing the gangway, making it safe. Emma walked through the captain's quarters slowly, touching the desk where Frank had written his logbook, running her fingers along the spines of his books. Tell me about him, she said. About my grandfather. Weldon thought for a moment. He was a quiet man. Didn't say much, but what he said mattered. He was gone a lot when I was growing up. His work kept him at sea for months at a time. I used to resent that. Thought it meant he didn't care. But after I found all this, he gestured around the ship. I realized he cared more than I ever knew. He just showed it differently. Did he know about me? He knew everything about you. Ruby said he used to talk about you at the diner. Said you were brilliant and brave and deserved better than what happened. I wish I could have known him. Me too. Emma picked up a framed photo from the desk, one Weldon hadn't noticed before. It showed a much younger Frank Parr standing on the deck of this same ship, squinting into the sun, a rare smile on his face. Someone had written on the back, "First voyage's captain, scared as hell but trying not to show it." "He looks like you," Emma said. "You think so?" Same eyes, same expression when you're thinking hard about something. Weldon took the photo, studied it. Maybe Emma was right. Maybe he'd inherited more from Frank than he'd realized. Not just the tools and the ship, but the stubborn determination to do right by family, even when it cost everything. They spent the afternoon on the ship, Emma exploring every corner, asking questions about the evidence, about the investigation, about Sarah. Weldon answered everything honestly, even the hard parts. Emma deserved the truth, all of it. As the sun started to set, they sat on the deck, watching orange light paint the fields gold. "What happens to the ship?" Emma asked. "I don't know. I've been thinking about that. Could we keep it? Turn it into something? Like what? I don't know. A memorial, maybe. For Grandpa Frank and for Mom. A place to remember them." Weldon looked at the vessel. This impossible ship in the middle of nowhere. It had been his father's refuge, his evidence vault, his final gift. Maybe it could be something else now. Something that honored the past while looking forward. "That's a good idea," he said. "We could work on it together. Restore it properly. Make it beautiful." "I'd like that." They sat in comfortable silence as the stars came out. After a while, Emma leaned against Weldon's shoulder. A small gesture, but it meant everything. "Dad," she said quietly. "Yeah. I'm glad you didn't give up, even when it seemed impossible. I didn't do it alone, nor your grandfather, Ruby, Claire. A lot of people helped. But you're the one who came back, who fought for me. So thank you." Weldon put his arm around her, felt her settle against him. "You don't have to thank me. You're my daughter. I'd fight forever for you." "I know. That's why I'm thanking you." They stayed there until the night grew cold, and Emma started yawning. Then they climbed down from the ship, got in the truck, and drove to the small house Weldon had rented in town. It had 2 bedrooms, a kitchen with mismatched appliances, and a porch where they could sit in the evenings. Nothing fancy, but it was theirs. Emma went to her room to do homework. Weldon stood in the doorway, watching her settle at her desk, surrounded by books and papers. A normal teenage evening, the kind he'd missed for 10 years. Ruby stopped by later with dinner, a casserole and fresh bread. She'd become a fixture in their lives, part of their makeshift family. They ate together, talked about Emma's progress in her new school, made plans for the weekend. After Ruby left and Emma went to bed, Weldon sat on the porch alone. The night was quiet except for crickets and the distant sound of a train. He thought about Sarah, about how she'd fought to protect Emma at the end, about his father, spending years collecting evidence, leaving it all behind like seeds planted for a future he'd never see. About the long road that had led here, to this porch, this town, this second chance at being a father. It wasn't the life he'd imagined. Emma was 16 now, not 6. They'd missed so much time together, but they had time ahead of them, years to build something new from the wreckage of what was taken. Weldon looked up at the stars, the same stars his father had navigated by for 40 years, and felt a strange peace settle over him. The ship had given up its secrets. Justice had been served. Emma was home. Some wounds never fully heal, but they can close. They can scar over, and with time, with love, they can become part of your story instead of the end of it. Weldon stood, went inside, locked the door, checked on Emma one more time. She was asleep, her breathing soft and steady. He kissed her forehead gently, something he'd dreamed of doing for 10 years. "Good night, sweetheart," he whispered. Then he went to his own room, got into bed, and slept the sleep of a man who'd finally found his way home.